if you're okay, I'm just going to dive in.
Yeah, let's just dive in. We'll see where it takes us. Down
From,
memory lane for
yeah,
starters.
down memory lane, although, yeah, for starters, exactly. You and I met at a cafe, one of those Italian cafes with the cheesy white pillars and,
Yeah, it was probably
the plaster statues.
Calabria or
And
something.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We met there and you asked some excellent questions around why are you doing it? We talked through why it was a tattoo and not a brand or some other mark.
Mm-hmm.
I talked about feeling like this was an excavation as opposed to a marking, like that the line had always existed and that this process was just bringing it to the surface.
Right.
We talked about all of that. And in December of 2004, so this was after the last production by more than 6 months.
Yeah.
I wrote an essay, The Amenable Object and Performance Life as Feminism. And I think it's a good springboard.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the quotes that I pulled out of that, my former reluctance, and I will say current as well, stemmed from a disconnect between my understanding of feminist theory and what I viewed to be my place in the world. I had been reluctant to identify as a feminist. And then, and sometimes now,
Right.
I feel this disconnect between where feminism was, where it is, and my place in the world, which is why I loved I'm not inside feminism, I'm not outside feminism, I'm inside and outside from Jean Randolph, because it's so true to my experience. Any thoughts on that from what you remember of the original work and what you've witnessed over the last 20 years in terms of my discussions with people that you have seen?
Well, it's surprising to hear you say that you don't claim that identity of feminist, right? That there's a reluctance around that. Because I would see the work very much within that feminist canon. There's so many lines of connection around what other artists who would have called themselves feminists were doing at the time, the historical kind of context that you were drawing on, and the way that what you've done kind of like prefigured some of the ways that we've projected feminism into the 21st century. So I guess we were in the 21st century when it happened. It feels like a long time ago. Like a lot really has changed. And I find that like for me, my memory in particular of kind of that time and what we were trying to do and who we were trying to be, there was so much kind of, like you say, there was a complexity and lots of ways in which we had encountered each other. And we were in communities that were really active in trying to take space and claim identity.
This is really well put. Okay, so jumping into the next quote. So we're going to bounce around a bit.
Okay.
So this is a quote from Theodore Shank on Linda Montano. These living events are framed by the viewer by being removed from their usual context. As a result, life, like found art, is transformed into an object for perception. How relevant do you think that observation is to the work?
Oh, I think that was essential for you. I mean, from my perspective, I think I still see it as a performance event, as a thing that happened, that had an ephemerality about it, right? That happened at a particular time and place with a particular community of observers and participants. But I know that for you, the marking or the excavating, I think you called it earlier, that's something that you have carried with you the last 20 years. So those ways in which your being and your appearance in the world operates as an art project every moment.
This brings me to an observation I have made recently when people have been asking me about this line. Most recently on Santa Monica Beach in California, while I was meeting someone literally at 6 a.m. as I was coming out of the ocean. And I said to this woman who noticed the line, this introvert has been transformed into a much more ambivert, extroverted type of person because of all those conversations. If you can remember what I was like as a person in terms of that spectrum,
Mm,
introvert, extrovert. Give me
mm.
any observations you can make on that.
Oh, Juliana, you've always been Juliana to me.
That's good.
Yeah, well, and it would be hard for me to say because, we met and quite quickly began this work together. There was a depth, an intimacy in those moments through the performance that mean that I relate to you in a way that I think I wouldn't have if we had just, been going to the clubs together and having parties and all that kind of stuff with the people that we knew in common.
Yes.
I have seen the depths of you in a way and really early on, and they're still there. So I can't really say what you were like in your relations in the kind of social context in the world, because I felt like even when I saw you interact or when I see you interact, I still see the Juliana that I met in, what's the way I want to explain, like in a textured affect, in something that was really aesthetic outside of the realm of our daily experience, right? Like, so I always see you that way, even when we're drunk in a field on scotch, celebrating your your mother passing, like I
Oh,
still
that's
see you
yes.
always. Are you more extroverted than you used to be? I don't know. Have you had a kind of reflection of your experience through those conversations with other people that have allowed you to grow and take on challenges that you maybe wouldn't have? Of course. But then so have I. I think part of the process of maturing from being the the idealistic and ambitious 20 somethings or 30 somethings, how, oh god, I don't want to date us too much,
Yeah.
early 30 somethings, like feeling that we could change the world by making art together. That dream died for me.
Oh,
Over the last couple of decades, although it's reigniting in a different kind of way. The way that a life moves. I think if you had asked me back in early 2000 what I thought about essentialism and thinking about essence and universality, and I know we had a lot of like arm wrestly conversations about that. I'm very much the kind of social constructivist, performativity
yes.
kind of person. I would say that's been the transformation for me, that I am more deeply connected to something that we might call essence or soul, and understand that in an embodied way, not just theoretically, because I think theoretically I still have resistance to the idea, but I
Yeah.
feel it, right? And that's
Yes.
what I mean about you being you. Your articulation of the one consciousness hasn't changed.
Was introduced to a science fiction series by an author named Diane Simons, who talks about in this series love being the void that binds. And I
Ah,
wish I had had that language when we were
mhm.
making and having those initial discussions. To me, that's what I was trying to get to.
I'm writing that down because that is quite resonant with a lot of things that are going on
Yeah.
in the world right now.
One of the notes that I made in relation to that quote that we've just been discussing, life, like found art, is transformed into an object for perception. I met a
Mm.
clerk. I was in Trader Joe's in Los Angeles on my birthday this year. And the
Mm.
clerk at the till says, "How are you?" And I said, "Happy." And he said, "That's the best thing I've heard all day. Why are you happy?" And I said, "I'm here." And he said, "You just made my day."
Mm.
And it's
Mm.
those kind of moments that Seamline has brought me to, really owning the moment and being very succinct and specific. And when I'm happy, I say so. It is almost unfailing that people really resonate with that. In
Mm.
the same way that
Mm.
living this line, one of the interesting recurring themes that I've had in the conversations, thousands of conversations now, almost everyone immediately intuitively understands that there's
Yeah.
meaning, that it's not quote unquote just a line.
Yeah.
So what are the other quotes here? Can experience constitute an object? And I'll follow that up
Mm.
immediately with, consider then that the art object is not only an object, but any moment that has been agreed upon as art, be that performance, theory, teaching, the sharing of food, living, birthing, or dying. This was
Mhm.
something that I wrote myself in
Mm,
context of this essay. Thoughts?
mm, mm. Well, of course.
Kind of obvious, I guess, right?
I mean, this is why I've always been so enamored of performance art, because it does create that container that allows us to perceive an experience that we might have quite regularly in our everyday life in a different way.
Hearing you
Mm,
describe it that way, when I was doing a performance of my hand washing series,
mhm,
Comfort Measures, in Toronto, my friend Margaret, who is a Baptist minister, said she was really deeply uncomfortable with the concept when I had described it to her. But when she saw it in performance, she said, "You created this intimate bubble that was so compelling and quiet and engaging." And it's that kind of power in performance that I think keeps me with it too, and has brought me back to it, even though, for the last decade, other than my performative conversations of Seamline, I have
mm,
been not terribly active on the performance front.
mm.
But those conversations happen multiple times every year, so it's kept me engaged. Which brings me to another quote, which is timely given the trajectory we were taking, quoting myself here. Instinctually, I knew I had to prepare myself for a lifetime of conversation and interaction around the concept of the line, and thus needed the experience of shared ritual to set the stage of what was to come. Could I have made this work as a lifetime performance in the same way without that 13-part series to kick it all off?
I mean, I'm not sure about that, although I was thinking as you were starting to ask this question, I was thinking about, some of the performances that I researched and wrote about in my own kind of scholarly activity and things that I was inspired by. Many of them I'd never actually participated in the live moment. And some of those things I'm trying to remember, like Gina Pane, for example, or performance artists who performed for the camera, for the documentation, but not in a live context, in a ritualized space that was set up as a performance perception, right? And I think some of that work is just as powerful as things that were staged in a live shared experience. Maybe they're differently constituted, but I think you could have. I mean, there probably would have been many different ways that you could have engaged this concept of the line and the living engagement and relationality that it creates. There would have been many different ways I think you could have done it. Now you chose to do it in a concerted period of time with a kind of annual framing and a monthly rhythm, and with all of these other ritual elements that you brought in. So yes, I mean that now actually comes into the conversations that you have around it. So of course it's an essential part of it, but could you have had other conversations around the line if you had gone to Teresa's studio and done it in private and just ended up being a body walking around with this line for people to say, hey, what's that? um that,
Yes,
that would have been
yes.
also interesting, but it would have been different.
And you've reminded me about some of the things that went into my decision process and thought process. There were a couple of things that happened mid process. I was in a class at Emily Carr with Susan Stewart, and she was pushing me really hard to do a deep dive theoretically around this work. And I resisted because I did not want the theory to influence the work. I
Mm.
knew already what I wanted to do. And the reason that I chose to make it take 12 months was budgetary. I knew
Right.
that I
Yeah.
could afford $150 a month for Teresa's time and effort,
Yeah.
which is what I paid her. And
Yeah.
so I designed it that way to make it
Right.
affordable, to make
Yeah.
it possible. And I think that's an essential part of it's good to recognize that sometimes when you're making these types of self-funded commitments, and that's part of the view I have to this podcast series, is to talk
Mm.
to young, old, like whatever, whoever wants to make performance around some of the strategies you can use as a working person to continue to make
Mhm.
the work, because that was essential to it too. I was
Mhm.
working full time through this entire period.
Yes. Yeah. You were.
and making a short film every 4 weeks,
Yeah.
essentially,
Yeah.
which is in retrospect was a crazy schedule. And look what I've done. I'm doing it again now with this podcast, but that's okay. Things have changed. The technology. So
The
thank
the
you. It's
budgetary thing makes me think of, I often refer back to this, when I was in mime school, way back, pre all of this even. I do remember one of the exercises that we had where we were given, a platform, like a 2x4 platform, 5 people each bringing one object, and we were asked to make theater with like these limitations. And sometimes those structures of limitation, whether they're financial or material or temporal, they create the juice, yeah, for the
yes.
creative work, right? I mean, and because you have something that you need to push against, and figure out the creative or innovative solution to like still accomplish the intention that you have, the concept that you want to articulate, but within a frame.
Well, and that raises a couple of interesting thoughts. One of them, the fact that I was in a film and video program at Emily Carr, but deliberately keeping this Seamline work out of the classroom so that I could claim it as my own, so that
Mm,
it wouldn't be considered student work,
mm,
right? Which it never was.
no.
Plus, the fact that this conversation we're having relates directly to Lars von Trier and the 5 obstructions. It's exactly what he set up
Mm, hmm.
with his mentor, was giving him obstructions to
Yeah.
remake his classic film, and it just made it so rich. It's such a beautiful film. I've been trying to find it to watch it again, and it's really difficult to find. I might have to tap Emily Carr's library to see if they've got a copy or access or something.
Mm,
So this brings me to another question. In performance, life as art, life as a performance piece,
mm,
durational,
hmm.
where is the downtime? How does the artist recharge? This is a question I wish that I had asked Linda Montano when I met her. I don't think I
Ah,
did. If this somehow reaches her, I'd love to hear her answer. I'd love to hear it from
yeah.
Abramovic. I'd love to hear it from any other artist who has positioned their life as art. Um, Thoughts on that?
Mm. It's interesting. I'm thinking about just a little bit about this time that we're in right now, kind of emerging out of the pandemic and into a whole bunch of other disruption, kind of the age of disruption, I think. And I've been noticing the challenges that myself and people I know, and even people I don't know very well, the challenges we're having around commitment, like actually showing up for each other, showing up to do the things that we value. I mean, I teach yoga, and I just like, I'm really surprised at how slow the recovery of the studios where I teach is. In fact, I think things have completely transformed. I don't know if they'll ever return to a place where people like are committed to coming to practice, you know, even just weekly, let alone,
Mhm.
twice a week, daily, or whatever, however they want to do it. But so this idea of like commitment and the resilience that you need in order to sustain a long-term commitment requires a kind of micro pause, or a pause that's built into the commitment, that the commitment itself is regenerating the energy to continue. And I think somehow that got broken, um, just in a kind of sociological sense, with the pandemic. Like maybe I'm just rambling with an analysis at the moment that completely off the cuff.
So
Mm.
I am hearing you. It's giving me some thoughts around commitment.
Yeah, no,
I'm now I'm
I think that's how you find the resilience to sustain it. Like there is no downtime because it's not separate, because
oh, you're
it's folded in. There's an unfolding in.
interesting. Part of what I was thinking about as you were talking about commitment, I remember clearly I saw in you an exhaustion around the 6 or 7 month point
Mhm.
where you were getting fed up with the work. I was getting fed up with the work. Nigel was getting fed up with the work. Elisa, his partner, was definitely getting fed up. And ultimately I ended up moving it to Emily Carr as a result of their lack of commitment to the work, because they double booked me, which I don't want to focus on, because I'm still grateful for the 10 months that they did give. And it was a wonderful, warm, and
beautiful
welcoming.
space.
It was a beautiful space. The Union in particular, it was really gorgeous.
Yeah.
So make no mistake, I'm grateful. Do you remember us talking about, I have this vague memory of the two of us talking about, we said we were going to do it, and we're doing it.
I don't remember that, but that's definitely something I would have said.
Yeah.
Like I had made a commitment to you into the project. I knew what it was going in. I mean, there were lots of unknowns, obviously, that came up, and things that happened that changed, that were more than I had expected, or were different from what I had anticipated. I was committed to seeing it through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for continuing to show up. It was huge. Wouldn't have happened without you. And there we go. In life is art, the luxury of discarding the unwanted, less than perfect work becomes impossible, which is what you were just talking about. The commitment is there, so you just take it, warts and all.
Yeah.
Okay, now this brings me a quote I'm quoting myself again. As a woman who has struggled with weight issues, body image, the frustration of being judged based on appearance, I welcome the opportunity to offer an alternative approach, that we recognize our bodies as temporary, imperfect vessels of the essence of who we are. I was astounded to read this and think, it was a pleasure to look back on my own writing and go, shit, I was onto something. I wish I had remembered this at certain points over the last 10, 20 years, because that's what I was trying to do. So to be reminded now, I'm grateful to be at a point. This Seamline work I have never managed to produce the coherent, concise, consistent document of what happened 20 years ago. This podcast is going to be an attempt to do both. to be that document that could have happened, that everyone else expected to happen immediately thereafter, but that I knew was going to take longer to manifest, that I didn't get to at 5 years. We ended up going to Croatia at year 5 or thereabouts. That didn't happen at 10 years. That didn't happen at 15. At 15, that was pre-COVID. Can you believe that? Right? Just before COVID, I was moving back to Edmonton, like all of these things. So the time is here, the time is now. And reading that quote is going to change the performance conversations that I have with people going forward. So it's lovely to be reminded about the roots, which is really what I was hoping for from this conversation.
Good.
It is good.
Yeah. That always seemed like a really core part of the project for me. And so I had, in preparation for our conversation today, I don't have nearly as much of the documentation and stuff that you have to go back to, but I did go back and read that conference paper that we wrote together for the Croatia presentation for PSI, and thinking about there was something in that about like not being, like wanting to be a universal body, and the kind of gendering of the performance, and me insisting on the specificity of it. I really think there was always something that was really important, that it was your body, your particularly inflected body, with its history and its psychology and its longings and like all of those things, right? Like it was important that it was you, that your body did have a kind of cultural resonance that spoke to something that would have been very different if you had inhabited a different form.
It's absolutely true. I recognize that now. It did have to be my body. And without recognizing it, and I mean, I'm quoting myself here, never underestimate a human's ability to contradict themselves. Even as I was resisting some of those theoretical frameworks that you were proposing,
they were activated.
They were activated, and I myself said it was an excavation. Well, if it's an excavation of this body, it can only happen on this body. Now, through all of that ritual, though, that was where it started to become more universal. By making it public, giving the audiences an opportunity to witness, that
Mm.
exchange became
Mhm.
the symbolism, I think, was there for some of those participants.
Yeah.
So this might be a bit of a turn, this next quote.
Mm.
Life rarely offers solutions to the moments of discomfort we endure. In life as art, as well as life, it is left up to the participants to discern what will make the situation bearable for them.
Mhm.
And I remember being so disappointed in the first session. A high school friend of mine was a writer for Terminal City in Vancouver, and he came to the first session and he left very abruptly, very early in, just after I
Mm.
turned gray. And it took me a while to circle back to him to say, Alan, why did you leave? And he said, it was hot. It was so stuffy. I mean, you had done everything you could to make that Hastings Art Gallery a more comfortable space, but all I saw was my friend in pain and in trouble.
Mm.
And he couldn't take it.
Couldn't take it. Yeah.
It got better after that. And do you remember why? Jackie cracked a joke.
Oh, did she? Of course she did.
Of course she did. And everybody laughed. You laughed
Yeah.
just like that. I laughed. Teresa laughed. Everybody laughed. All 30 people in the room. And
Yeah.
we were able to keep going. And I didn't have another gray out through the entire
Entire time. Yep.
series.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, here's a good one. So again, quoting myself, an unexpected response to my delineating my body shell by excavating my seam was the license and agency it seemingly granted strangers to touch my body. Do you recall witnessing anyone tracing the line with their finger?
I'm sure it happened more than once, but I don't remember.
I don't remember specifics, but I
Yeah.
remember it happening a lot.
Yeah.
And
No, I'm
suddenly
sure.
having, I mean, this one's loaded for you and I both, but I'm hoping we can be okay with it. It made me feel like a pregnant woman.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was just thinking that. I'm like, this is that when you just the word license to touch my body, like that's one of those places where women are, well, I mean, generally speaking, there is a license to touch women's bodies without their consent under patriarchy, and lots going on around that at the moment too.
Yes.
But yeah, no, absolutely, and it's interesting. It's interesting how you invited that at the same time that you wanted to resist it.
And I did resist it. One of the conversations that I systematically over the last 20 years have shut down was if anyone sexualizes their comments, I will not engage.
Yeah,
It's not what it's about.
yeah.
It's a hard no, which is interesting because I'm a sensual and sexual person. And that's not to say
Hmm.
that there haven't been conversations with my partners that I've had in the last 20 years. There have, but those were consensual. When those kind of comments come uninvited, other than the fact that I'm just there, I shut it down. And wearing the line has actually given me better strength around making that a hard
Making that
boundary.
a boundary. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, this I think you're going to relate to very strongly theoretically from the conversations then and probably now too. One woman in a wheelchair admitted to having great anxiety over the marking of an unscarred body for the sake of an artwork. Did you think then, and do you think now, that there is a problematic aspect to the fact that I made it such a permanent mark?
Well, that's a big question because it's not
Yeah.
really just about you, it's about a whole field of art practice. I mean, it comes a little bit back to what you were asking about a little earlier in our conversation around perception.
Mhm.
And I think that space of relationality between, one individual's embodiment and history and another's, there are so many things that are we're blinded to, that we could go on, right? There's just so much complexity in that space that you wouldn't have been able to please everybody and to not be problematic. I mean, if you didn't have somebody who felt that what you were doing was problematic, I would have said the art probably really sucked.
It wasn't worth doing.
Right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that comment about, like someone who has, without consent, intention, or agency, been marked in such a way that they would have a very different entry point to what they were witnessing than someone with a non, air quoting, non-problematic, able-bodied existence. And I
And
think it was
here we
something that,
are.
neither of us probably even thought to interrogate at the time, because we didn't come from a place where that might have been our experience, or we might have been close to an experience like that. I'm sure there are lots of ways in which your project's problematic, Juliana.
Of course, we know that. We knew it at the time, and we know it now. It's
Yeah,
interesting to revisit those words at this stage in my life. I've just been diagnosed with osteoarthritis in both my shoulders. It's
yeah,
probably in both my hips. It's probably in one ankle. It's probably in both my knees. So I am no longer able-bodied.
yeah,
I am a damaged body at this stage, and the foundations for that were being set 20 years ago,
yeah,
30 years ago,
yeah.
40 years ago. I'm living with the consequences of being strong and muscling my way through things.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And it's giving me pause to really respect where that person was coming from.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, it was Marilyn Cherenko, who was an animation professor at Emily Carr and might still be, I'm not sure if she is, a very smart, very theoretically grounded artist making that observation. I now empathize a little more with the comment than I did at the time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Would I choose to do it again? Hell yes, because I just started filling in the back half, right?
Right.
And this is a nice time to talk about the fact that, in the same way that I position Seamline as a lifetime performance, the filling in, the backstory, quote unquote,
Hmm. Hmm.
of this line, the fact that I am filling in the back half of my body, is all being informed by my personal story. I'm drawing references from childhood, from friendships that I've had, from lovers that I've had, from children that I didn't have, from
Hmm.
all of that. That's all going to be going into this work. And that performance series, I am not doing the tattooing publicly. It's being done privately, but I'm wearing, obviously, the conversations will continue. And it's for the next
Hmm.
13 years. It's once a year instead of once
Yeah.
every 4 weeks.
Nice.
So, yeah, I've actually booked Teresa to jump ahead to the back of my head where she's going to do an orca as a tattoo.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it works.
Hmm.
So a little bit of a sidebar there, very personal. Oh, here we are.
Yeah.
The aspect of amplification of experience is
Mhm.
what I feel courageous for facing. If the needle stings when I am alone with the experience, it digs trenches when there are 50 people watching it happen. It is a
Mm.
feedback loop of energy that takes the sensations and heightens them to a point where the physicality is unrecognizable from the original sensation.
Mm. Mm.
You were the closest witness to my pain.
Mhm.
And interestingly, I was thinking as we were discussing earlier, you've become a yoga instructor. It's a part of your daily practice. And some of the strategies that you gave me as my caretaker were
Mhm.
definitely informed by yoga and yogic breathing and
Yeah.
and all of that.
Yeah.
Do you have any observations or memories around what that was like for you as that close witness?
Well, I think one of the things that I've learned over time is to be able to hold that space, that witnessing space, but in a way that doesn't require me to give of myself quite as much, because I think that exhaustion point was astute. That there was definitely a place where I just was like, I was committed because I had committed myself, not because I wanted or had the energy to be there. I might have wanted to walk out of the room at some time,
Hmm.
and I couldn't, because my responsibility, I was, or at least said that my understanding of my responsibility was that I wasn't allowed to leave. Like that I couldn't. 20 years of practice teaches you a little bit more to be able to sit in a space of witnessing that is less emotionally invested. Maybe the words are hard here, because I think there was a deep, like at the time, complicated emotional investment, right? I mean, we were at the beginnings of our friendship. There was a lot of stuff there, and I think that was probably what created the depletion.
Yes.
The space of regard for another's pain, that is an essential part, I think, of becoming fully wholly human, because we all have moments where we encounter another's pain, and we need to know how to be present with it in a
And
way
doesn't
that doesn't damage one's own integrity.
and doesn't this all just outline how much things have changed? If you and I were sitting down to plan this work now, our conversations around boundaries and
Oh, it'd be
agency would
way,
be
yeah,
completely different. And
yeah.
I thank millennials for this. Thank you,
Hmm, hmm.
millennials. Right? They've changed the conversation in a way that I think is beautiful and wonderful, and more than we could have hoped for as Gen X. I don't know how I would have reacted if you would have left during one of those sections, but I understand deeply and fundamentally now that you had every right to do so.
Yeah. I wouldn't have even recognized at the time that I did. That's what I mean about, like, so concerned about the safety and support that you needed to do what you had committed to, that I wasn't taking care of myself in those moments, in to a degree. I mean, there were places obviously where I was like,
Yeah,
where maybe I did speak a little the frustration and the challenge that I had, and asked, maybe circuitously, for like, can you
yeah,
just like take down the temperature on this a little or something. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
but
You
yeah.
did. I don't remember the specifics, but I remember kind of going, okay, I have to. I demanded so much from everyone around me through that
Yeah.
performance series. I can say that now more than I
Mm,
had a right to,
mm,
really, truly, which is why it's all the more astounding to me now that people came back, that everyone who committed saw it through right to the
mm,
end.
mm,
There was no one that didn't. That, it's still astounding to me, and I'll be forever grateful to every single one, to you in particular, to Teresa, to every single one of the people who helped document, the photographers, the videographers, the musicians, Tatiana, who
mm.
came back a second time. I remember her saying, and I was never able to fully unpack it with her. She said, "This work is special, and it means a lot to me to be able to do this type of work in a way that she refused to explain it."
Mm, mm,
It was interesting. So let's end then with, in essence, they were performing as much as I was, and that was in relation to the audiences. The frustration I had with the documentation was that there wasn't enough of the audience reaction.
mm, mm.
In retrospect, there was quite a lot. What was it like for you as the caretaker relating to the audience, not me?
I never really thought about them in those moments. My
Wow.
focus was completely with what was happening with you.
Wow. Even when Janet fell down on the
Oh yeah, no, I mean, but at the same time, like, yeah, no, I mean, it wasn't that I wasn't unaware of
yes.
what was happening with people, but I knew that my responsibility was to you and not to the experience of any particular participant in the ritual. And this is why it was exhausting,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because it was not a two-way or multi-way exchange of energy. It was the like it was all you in the center drawing from us what you needed to sustain what you were doing.
What I didn't recognize at the time was that all that I drew from all of you is what I have been giving back for 20 years.
Mm, mm, yeah,
And it's taken this conversation to recognize that.
yeah,
So I have you to thank more than anyone. Thank you.
you're welcome.
I think that is a fantastic note to end on.
Mm, I think so too.